Welcome back. Labor has outlined its climate policy ahead of the next election. The headline is a 2030 reduction policy of 43%. There has been criticism from Scott Morrison and Angus Taylor. It does seem to be different criticism so far, though. They talk about this being an opening bid, and the Greens would help them, or force them, I should say, to go further. Joining me live is Liberal MP Jason Falinski. Thanks for your time. When we compare this election to last, Labor's policy might have been 2% lower, but it's based off a higher projection your government says it will get to. There's a lot more behind, a lot more validity to this policy compared to the last one. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Labor has certainly done a lot of work between the election and now. They've come up with a policy that is just as ambitious, but it still has some of the problems, Tom, and they're going to have to do a lot of explanation about how they get to 43% without it costing jobs in regional and rural areas, and that's really for them to do, not for me to do.
Well, they say they've done it, they've got modelling on it. What specifically is their issue? Can you point to a specific policy within this document that you have an issue with?
Well, in truth, Tom, I think the thing that most people are pointing to, not specifically me, is the crackdown on large polluters and what impact that would have on economic activity in those areas. And, we know that Meryl Swanson, the Labor member for Patterson in regional New South Wales, has made that point already herself. So I think they're the things that Labor is going to have to go and explain to people, and, Australians will come to their own view on whether, there is such a thing as magic pudding in climate policy.
Well, the safeguard mechanism, Labor says it will gradually bring that down to a net zero. That is the 215 companies, institutions, organisations that are on this, the biggest communities in the country, will have to go net zero by 2050. Your government has a net zero policy by 2050. What's the problem here?
Well, Tom, the problem is not... The problem is how you get there. So we could get to net zero by 2030 if you want to do that. The problem is you'd have to close down 3/4 of the economy to do it. So that's the trade-off that people are making, not just here, but right around the world. So yes, we have a plan to get to net zero by 2050, if not before. We've outlined a $20 billion investment or cornerstone investment on which we hope the private sector will leverage another $100 billion worth of investment in clean technology. We're seeing a lot of new technology come down the line on all of that. All those things are positive things. Labor has said they won't use the safety mechanism to allow intersectorial trading because Angus Taylor described that as a carbon tax, so they didn't want to be accused of introducing a backdoor carbon tax. So they are now relying on big polluters not being able to buy credits from other sections of the economy that are doing better. So, for example, one of the reasons that Australia has been able to reduce its carbon emissions by 20% since 2005 has mostly been because we've managed our land use in a way that has reduced carbon emissions and, in fact, become a carbon sink. Now, the reason that we did that was because it was the most efficient and cost-effective way for us to do it. The second most cost-efficient and effective way for us to do it was through energy-saving devices, which means you didn't see blowouts in carbon emissions in other sectors of the economy.
Let me jump in. So you're saying their issue they can't trade between sectors, but the Clean Energy Regulator can decide which areas within this and which institutions will be reducing emissions.
So more people. So more people in Canberra directing the economy. Oh, that's never gone wrong. Centralised planned economies, they've always worked out just fine. I mean, if that's their plan, then they will need to explain to the Australian economy. Sorry, Tom, you were saying.
This broad group, 2/3 of them already have net zero plans by 2050 anyway. You want to get to 2050 net zero as well. This is gradually going down over that point. So what you're saying is all of these companies and institutions will get to net zero anyway by the year 2050. They'll just do it in a slightly different
manner. Sorry, you're saying that, not me. You're saying that. No, that's not my argument at all. My argument is...
So what, these 215 emitters then, what will their emissions be in 2050? Will they be higher than net zero?
I don't know, Tom. I'm not them. And my point is, I'm also not the Labor Party. This is their policy. They need to explain to rural and regional and Australia how their policy will not cost jobs. And it's the 2030 target, not the 2050 target. So I think both major parties are in agreement that it is possible for the Australian economy, despite it being incredibly difficult, as you and I have spoken about at length. because our economy has both mining, energy and agriculture to get to net zero by 2050. It is possible to do that without costing people jobs. Can you get to 43% by 2030 without doing that? That's the question that they have to explain to regional
When you get the
Australia.
government's upward projection of 35% and add in what the states are doing, I think most would say it's not too onerous. Let me ask you this. So you said others...
Well, no, I'm sorry. I'm not going to let you get away with that. I'm not going to let you get away with that. What are the states doing?
What about the great government of New South Wales at 50%?
The great government of New South Wales. Well, the great government of New South... Yeah, sure. The great government of New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, and a lot of them, they're very good at issuing targets. They're not so good at issuing plans. So you know,
New South Wales,
this is
Matt
not...
Keane's kidding himself,
This is not a costless exercise. This is an exercise in which people need to understand that there are trade-offs. Well, I'll give you one example on that.
Okay, so hang on. So if you want one example, reach 50%.
Yeah, okay.
Is that what you're telling me by
I'm not
2030?
saying. No. Nice try. I'm not saying that, but I'll give you an example of the state setting targets without backing it up with action, and that is Snowy Hydro 2.0. So that is by anyone. I don't think anyone can disagree that Snowy Hydro 2.0 is the largest renewable project in Australia. And further to that, it's dispatchable power, so it will allow a lot more renewables onto the grid. The question becomes, though, if no one's building the transmission lines in either Victoria or New South Wales to plug it in, then what are we doing? So the states can talk about reducing...
That might be why 20 billion is being spent on rewiring the grid by Labor. It sounds like a good idea.
So the states can talk about, you know, reducing their carbon emissions by 2030. But here's a concrete plan that they could undertake, which is to ensure that when Snowy Hydro 2.0 is finished, that the transmission lines are there so that that energy can go into the grid.
Okay.
And no one, frankly, in the Canberra Press Gallery is actually asking those questions of any state government.
Maybe we need the grid rewired at a federal level. Quickly as well on Warringah, the PM says no adverse findings. That's why she's free to run. Well, there's been no findings from ICAC. How is that a proper argument?
Mate, I don't know what you're talking about. What I know is, except that you're talking about Gladys Berejiklian.
The Prime Minister said
running from,
in defence of her, there are no adverse findings.
Then Tom, ask the Prime Minister.
There are no findings at all.
Yeah. Well, ask the Prime Minister. I mean, I think all of us watched 2 weeks. All of us watched 2 weeks of public hearings, and at the end of it, yeah, she made a mistake. She should have told her colleagues that she was in a relationship with someone that she wanted to keep private and secret. And I don't think most fair-minded Australians consider that to be corruption.
Let me ask this. If she's elected and then there are adverse findings released by ICAC, what should happen then?
Well, mate, I think the people of Warringah, mate, you're just jumping over a lot of hoops here. The fact is, she hasn't announced that she's running for Warringah. If she runs for Warringah, then the people of Warringah will have to come to a view on that themselves. I think that well, mate, you know my view on the New South Wales Independent Commission Against Corruption. It has failed to root out systemic corruption over and over again, and focused on, you know, frankly, issues that I think most fair-minded Australians think are not really that major.
Just finally, in 30 seconds, you've got a candidate running against you, an independent in McKellar. She says, amongst other things, there's no difference between you and Barnaby Joyce. You all vote the same on legislation. Is that a fair cop?
No. Barnaby Joyce votes with me on legislation. You and I both know that I was in favour of net zero by 2050 and Barnaby Joyce was against it. And guess what the government announced only 2 months ago? So if you're going to accuse me of voting with Barnaby Joyce, I think the truth is that Barnaby Joyce votes with me.
Jason Falinski, thanks for your time. Talk soon. Let's get